What's up, y'all? This is the Adapt or Die podcast, a podcast that explores new and relevant ideas for the purposes of self-growth and helping you live a more fulfilled lifestyle. My name is Armel Tala.
And my name is Ben Smith. We're two university students pursuing our own journeys of self-growth with the hopes of sharing our findings with you.
Welcome back to another episode of the Adapt or Die podcast. Today we're going to be exploring happiness, and I know we've already kind of touched on an episode of happiness in one of the previous episodes from season 1, but this time we're going to approach it from, I guess a research and
we're going to get pretty research heavy, but it's going to be very applicable. Everything we're going to give a good amount of research, and then we're going to talk about how to implement that with each episode. So this is going to be a 2-week series, actually.
It's going to be a very long series.
Very long, but very interesting and very applicable.
Because when we thought about this, I was like, okay, we'll do our typical, 2 episodes per series. But this time Ben was like, yo, there's so much information we need to record. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like, it can't be that much. Like, it's happiness. Like, bro, we know about happiness. And then I go look at this man's notes, and it's like flooded.
Man, it was so much. I was researching, like every time I found something, I was like, I just found more. It just kept growing. But enough time. We don't have to spend too much time on research, but let's just kind of hop into it. First thing we want to do is define happiness. So it's kind of an ambiguous term, honestly. When we say happiness, we use it for like a lot of things in our life. We don't really have like a good like working definition of happiness. You know what I mean?
If I had to give a definition of happiness, like it's weird because like to describe happiness, you have to describe it with happiness. It's like what describe being happy? It's when I'm in a good mood. It's when I'm some people will be like, well, actually we're gonna break this theory. I was gonna say some people can describe happiness as like, oh, when things go the way I want, or like when things go the way I expected. But the thing is, you can be happy regardless of how things go. But so happiness is very ambiguous. It's not a set definition, and that's why people always say like, one person's happiness is different from another, because we can't define like what truly is happiness.
And we have so much we use words like joy or pleasure, things like that are like similar, but
and they're also just synonyms.
There's a lot of synonyms for happiness, but we don't really have like one common word for how we define like happiness.
Just a feeling. You just know when you're happy.
Exactly, you're just happy. But let's just define. So there's really 2 different types of happiness. So I got this from a professor from Yale. I'm sorry. Her name is Laurie Santos. Mm-hmm. And so she defines happiness in 2 different ways. So there's 2 different types as she defines it. Yeah. There's happiness in your life, and there's happiness with your life. And at first,
happiness and you read that, happiness in your life, happiness with your life. So like, if I had to think about what happiness in my life is, it's like happiness in my life and happiness with, I guess happiness in my life is like things in my life are making me happy. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. But happiness with my life is just like, I'm just content with everything that's occurring. Like all those little parts that make me happy, I'm content with them as a whole. That's maybe like how I see the definition.
You're definitely like really close, but like I just want to make sure. So to give it like very clearly, happiness in your life would be very much what we think of like day-to-day pleasures. So when you have like your favorite meal, like you're very happy in your life at that moment. Mm-hmm. Or if you're with your favorite friend, like you're very happy in your life at that moment with your friend. Yeah. On the other side, we have happiness with your life, and that would be happiness just with who you are as a person. Mm-hmm. So like your identity, how you interact with others, your character, like things, all of those things. Yeah. So that's happiness with your life. And you can see that there's a very distinct like difference between there, So like, that's just a baseline. We're going to start there. And then the next thing I want to talk about, we're going to go over expectations and framing. And so this is a great launching point for understanding happiness. And
expectations. This sounds interesting.
Yeah, this is interesting. So,
because because a lot of times, because you say that and relate it to happiness, I realize though, like when I go out to an event and I have like a certain expectation, or like I hang out with somebody and I have like a certain like, okay, when I hang out with this person, I'm trying to, do this, right? Or when I go out to this event, I want to, I want to win. It's like, let's say we're going bowling. It's like, I want to win 5. I want to win 5 of the games. I want all of them, It's like, maybe that's like expectation someone has. And then if I go out to that and then like I don't reach that, like the night may be a little poopier than it might be,
True,
you know.
true.
And,
Like,
and the bowling one is a bad one. Like a better one. Okay, let's say I'll give you guys a better one. I'll give you guys a better one. A better one's like with like hanging out with like a girl, right?
okay.
If I'm like okay, you know, I'm gonna go on this date, and then it's gonna go on this date, and then you know at the end maybe I'll get a kiss. I get
Oh.
a kiss. You're like, oop, I'll get a kiss.
Oh.
And then like you don't get a kiss at the end, and you feel like you put in all this work and effort. Obviously, you're not you know, no one has to give you a kiss, right? I'm not saying
No,
that at
not
all.
at all.
I'm just saying like, you know, you feel like you put in the work, and you're like, oh, you know, I set up this date, maybe I can get just a kiss at the end, and you don't get a kiss, and like even though you may still have a good date, or you know, and you just aren't as happy
Yeah,
with the
like-
result because you set such an expectation going
Right.
into it.
Like you said, an expectation, even if like you didn't, you know, obviously you weren't like trying to expect a kiss. But in a way you were like, you were preparing for yourself to have a kiss,
Yeah,
right?
you were hoping the end result would
Exactly.
be a kiss.
So like that was what you wanted, but then your expectations weren't met. And then because of that, like you were, you know, it has an effect on you. And the opposite is true. We talked about this example earlier. Like, you know, when you're in the car and you're driving home with your mom, and your mom's like, hey, you want to get Whataburger? And you're like,
whoa, hold on, you want to get Chick-fil-A? Let's be real here. Chick-fil-A is my crack, but
hot take before we move on, Cane's is better than Chick-fil-A. Just saying.
That's a whole different episode. I
could go on, but anyways, but like you had no expectation of going to, you know, whatever your favorite fast food restaurant is.
Yeah.
And then your parent says, you know, do you want to get this? And because your expectations were far surpassed, you had no expectation of getting your favorite food, right?
Yeah.
And then you got that favorite food. So because your expectations were surpassed, you are happy.
Yeah.
So like that's how like kind of like expectations can play a large role. And I want to give an interesting study that kind of backs up the first example you gave. And this is actually kind of funny. This was like an older study, and what they did was they pumped adrenaline into people. Actually, I think it was speed, but it has like the drug.
Yeah.
But it has like adrenaline type effect,
Yeah.
so like that like feeling. And then they put people into two different rooms. So one room was full of like people who were basically just like partying. They were like, whoa, like,
going
this
crazy.
experiment's so fun. Like, oh my god,
They're paying me to party.
And then the other room was like full of people who were angry. Like they were pumped up, but they were like aggressive. They're like, you know, and they just the people in the room.
Practically, all the dudes on steroids at the gym.
Yeah, but and then so like the people who were in the party room, they had a great time. Like they asked them afterwards, like, how satisfied were you with, you know, what their experience, like what did you think, like the people, etc. And the people in the party room had a great time. The people in the room with all the angry people were very like tense. They had a terrible time. Yeah, and so that's kind of a different way that expectations.
So it's like I don't know if I see. So I get the experiment says expectations. That makes me feel more like. I mean, they both came in like with the same type of like juice, you know, like juice stuff
for sure.
But I guess it's like more like you're in the environment and
right. Like as soon as they walked into the room,
okay, yeah, you like
their
you
expectations immediately flipped.
Yeah, you see a room full of people partying, you're like, okay, you know, this is gonna be fun. And then you walk in, you see a room full of angry meatheads, and you're like,
you're like,
someone's either gonna fight or I'm just gonna be mad too.
Exactly. So like that's like it's a different example. We all kind of know this to be true, the expectations thing. I'm sure we've like felt this, but that was an interesting example, basically, where like the people around you shifted your expectations, which like shifted your experience and changed your perception of your experience. And then obviously that relates back to happiness, because some people had a bad experience and some people had a good experience. So you wanted to talk about
expectations. Hold on. When it comes to expectations, there's this idea of what like synthetic happiness and versus natural happiness. And so for the people that don't know, like when we hear synthetic happiness, you're thinking in your mind like, wait, hold on, okay, like
you're like, I'm not trying to. Yeah, that's. Is it like some kind of potion? Like, are you giving me a pill?
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't sound good, right?
No, it doesn't sound good.
And then versus natural happiness, you're like, ooh, you know, like people are natural,
like,
like that sounds good. But all it is if we had to like just define like what is synthetic happiness and what is what is synthetic happiness, what is natural, so natural happiness is what we get when we get what we want. So it sounds weird, right? So it's like the feeling you get when it's a happiness you get when you get something goes your way.
So like when your desires are fulfilled.
Yeah, exactly. When your expectations are met, that's natural happiness.
Right?
Yeah. So really relating back to expectations, when your expectations are met, that's natural happiness. But then synthetic happiness is is you developing your happiness, is you being happy regardless of like your expectations not being met, right? So in the synthetic happiness is something that like it sounds off, but when when you hear the definition, it's like, oh no, that's just being content with
Right.
what occurs, right?
Yeah, and this is actually, I was going to go off on a tangent on stoicism, but I think I'll go off too far, so I'll reel it back in. But yeah, that's a really interesting idea on synthetic happiness, that like you can just be content even if your desires like aren't fulfilled. And it sounds bad, like synthetic happiness,
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't like, because we hear artificial a lot, and we love organic, and we hate artificial.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's just a word.
It's just a word to
describe like how we're not letting our circumstances dictate our happiness, and really artificially create the happiness just by being content with where we are, no matter whether our expectations are fulfilled or not.
And it, the word, the part of it being synthetic means just like, it just means like you have to, like, things in our life aren't always going to go the way we want.
Absolutely
like obviously
not.
right.
Yeah.
So but like in those situations you have two options. You can either just continue to let it make you ruin your mood, or you accept that situation and then you become happy. So it's kind of it's synthetic, because like when you get something your way, like of course you're gonna be happy, but when something goes bad, like you kind of have to you have to like work towards being happy.
Absolutely.
Right. But to hit more on it, like, so and then this idea that I'm speaking about, synthetic happiness versus natural happiness, came from a Harvard professor called Daniel Todd Gilbert. He's an American psychologist, writer, and like I said, Harvard professor. And so, and he when he first was just introducing that idea, he said 2 million years ago, from 2 million years, the human brain nearly tripled. Right. And in that,
but what is that? You mean like the
actual size, the architecture, the actual human brain?
That's so
tripled,
crazy,
right?
that they know
right?
that. I want to see like how they found that out, but keep going.
I think they found it out by just comparing like skulls, right? And because like, you can tell by a skull, like if some
but they
smaller
would
skulls,
like just the fact that they know how old the skull is, I guess through like carbon dating or something. But
dude, science
crazy.
is crazy. Science is crazy. But so, and all that being said, like, well, obviously, if something is gonna triple that big, is like something has to be formed. It's not like it just expanded for no reason,
right?
And so in that time period when our brain grew, we developed the frontal lobe, and then and it's particularly the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
And so, and the prefrontal cortex is one of like the main things. It's like, as Daniel described it, was in its experience simulator. So practically the thing that makes us very special as humans is we can like think of something that's going to happen before it happens.
Yeah, we have this, basically they call it mental time travel, and it's basically using your imagination to picture yourself in the future or the past or wherever, like any point, right? And that plays perfectly into this idea of framing.
Yeah, like expectations and framing.
So if expectations is you kind of shifting your point of view for future events, framing would be picturing yourself in the future, and then framing, like wondering how your future self would think about your present self right now, and then using that to shift your expectations, either of the future or of the past. And so this is a really interesting idea.
So what can you differentiate expectations and framing? Like, are those two different things, or are they the same thing?
They're very interrelated, but they're not totally the same thing. I would say that for like expectations can fall under framing. Like framing is a bigger idea.
But what is framing?
Yeah, so let me give you an example.
Okay.
Think about like the proudest moment, or just one of the proudest moments of your life, right? Maybe you had a really good sports run. Maybe you did something academically that was really great. Now think about all the work that it took to get to that point. You probably didn't enjoy everything that went through that. You probably enjoyed a lot of it, but there's probably a lot of sacrifice, maybe a lot of late nights, maybe a lot of blood, sweat, tears, whatever it was, right? But once you got to that point where you completed that achievement, when you look back on all of those unpleasurable, like really hard moments, you probably don't think of them as like the worst moment in your life, right?
Yeah.
You probably think of them as really great moments. Even though you didn't enjoy them in the moment, you think of them as happy moments because they led you to where you are now. And so how that plays into framing is that your current experience from like the fruits of your past labor are shaping how you think about your past experiences. So you're framing your past experiences of how you got to there because those led to good things, even though in the moment they didn't necessarily make you happy. Does that make sense?
So okay, so like expectations being like, it's kind of expectations would be what you set for that
For the
that
future.
end goal, for the future, but like
Right.
framing it relates to actually what happened in that moment that made you frame, like it helped you frame kind of like that experience,
Right. And
the
like
time.
you could use frame as like a substitute for expectation. Like you could frame the future, but you can't expect
Frame,
the past,
yeah,
right?
but you
So you can
can't, yeah.
frame the future and you can frame the past. So
Past.
that's what I mean, like
Yeah,
expectations like
It's like
within
one
framing.
part of it.
Yeah, so
It's like
expectations
half
like a
of it.
specific part of framing. And that's just how I interpret it. I
Mhm.
don't that's not like the scientific like literature. So like don't yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
Um,
That's pretty, but I do want to kind of hit back on synthesize, right? So
yeah, keep
talk
going.
about framing and expectations, right? And of course, like, if something doesn't go your way, right? You still have to find happiness, right?
Yeah.
And it was actually really something interesting he said. He said, well, one thing first is this idea of impact bias, and this had to do with something like the hedonic thing you mentioned. Can you explain to people? So let me say what impact bias is, and I want you to explain what the hedonic effect is, because the impact bias that we have as humans is like we have the tendency to overestimate the hedonic impact of future events. And so, can you explain what hedonic means?
Okay,
before?
so hedonic, the word itself, refers to like kind of like that in your life pleasure.
Yeah.
And what hedonic adaptation, so that's the word you're referring to. That phrase hedonic adaptation basically means that, and we've all experienced this. Imagine you just got like a new phone, right? That newness, that like happiness that you got from getting that new phone, it wears off very quickly. And so hedonic adaptation just means that we easily adapt to our circumstances such that we take them for granted. Does that make sense? So like that phone, the happiness that you got from it wears off very quickly. But in the same way, if you had taken like a lot of risk and lost a lot of money, you would not be like that much less happy than you like would be as if like you stayed with the same amount of money, because you would actually hedonically adapt to afterward, because you already lost the money. So like what are you going to do, right? So you adapt both ways, to like losing, to happiness, to pain. And so what he's saying is that like we often overestimate the emotional impact of events, but when in actuality our hedonic adaptation will allow us to be happy in almost any circumstance. And so that's kind of what you're getting at.
And this is important to remember, because it's all going to tie back, and especially when I'm explaining synthesize and kind of the examples is, well, first off, Daniel brought up this interesting point. He said a study showing this video I watched was from a TED Talk he gave.
Okay.
And this was back in like 2012. So he brought up a study that had happened recently at the time. He's saying showing how major life traumas, it's saying like these major life traumas in your life that occur, if they happen like 3 months ago, they don't affect your overall happiness. Like except a couple, of course, like there's a few traumas that can happen, but he say for majority of traumas in your life, going bankrupt or like, losing a girlfriend and like things like that,
you adapt very quickly.
Going back to the hedonic thing,
yeah. And so one interesting thing that I found, we're gonna talk more about hedonic adaptation actually in the
next episode.
It's actually gonna be the 4th episode on happiness. So it's gonna be
4 episodes on happiness. You better be happy.
We have a lot. We have a lot coming. But
I hope y'all are expecting to be happy after all 4.
You'll learn a lot, I promise. But one of the things I found was that I think it might have been Dan Gilbert again who did this experiment, but he basically asked like paraplegics and people who are paralyzed completely, like totally paralyzed, can only move like one eyeball, and they measured like how happy they were.
He brought up this,
and they found out that like those people, based on their studies, and it's not just like questionnaires, it's pretty in depth. Like it's not very it's very like it's a science. Like don't get me wrong, it's not just like, oh, are you happy? Like no, it really is. And they found that like they were the exact same amount. They had the same amount of happiness day to day as anyone else. And that's crazy, because if you think like, oh, what if I got paralyzed from the waist down? My life would be terrible for the rest of my life. But that's not true. And so going back to like that risk, we often overestimate the impact of pain or pleasure on our life.
And he brought up, in his talk, he brought up, he said that the happiness that they surveyed, like you said, when I talk to these people, the happiness of someone that just won the lottery a year after, compared to someone that became paraplegic a year after, was the same. It was just about the same.
Because like once you have all that money, like after a year, you're going to be adapted to having that money. And so like your lifestyle is not going to be any more or less happy just
So
because you have that money. But
so
we're gonna cover more on that in that fourth
yeah,
episode.
but so like we said, so someone that can be paraplegic and still be happy. What does that mean? It means that happiness can be synthesized.
Yes.
Right. So happiness can be synthesized, and as we described, synthesized happiness just means you kind of accepting what's going on and moving
Yeah.
forward makes you happy. And so in Daniel Gilbert, he brings up that, like, as humans we have this thing, like we can think of as a psychological immune system. And then it specifically says a system of cognitive processes, largely non-conscious cognitive processes that help us change our views on the world so we can feel better about the world around us, right? So to concise that, make it clear. So like,
Yeah, say it one more time
so
for me.
psychological immune system, and the way it's described is like these cognitive processes, which are mainly like unconscious, that kind of just happen, that allows us to adapt, that allows us to like our adaptive view of the world, so we can feel better, right? So you become paraplegic, like this system in you allows you to stay happy, even though it allows you to change your view, and like, because your view on life is completely different when you can, like, walk, and when you can, and things like that. And the reason why he gives it he kind of names it an immune system is, you think about the way your immune system works, is your immune system adapts like to like kind of like the environment around you, the sickness and stuff, and then it makes you stronger, like it makes your immune system stronger. Absolutely. So you can continue to live
that's an interesting that's a really good way to frame it. I like that.
It's a really good way to frame it. It took me a second, but so one of the examples he brings up about synthesizing happiness is this dude named Maurice Bickham.
Okay.
So Maurice Bickham, he spent 37 years in the Louisiana State Penitentiary.
You told me about this.
For a crime.
This example is crazy.
He spent 37 years in a penitentiary for a crime he did not commit. This is the thing. He did not commit the crime.
He was in a penitentiary.
I don't even know the difference between a penitentiary and prison, but like anytime I hear someone say pen, that scares me.
No, it's more than just like jail. Yeah. Like it's like hardcore.
Yeah. So think about being in jail for something he knew in his heart of hearts he did not commit it, right? And then he was exonerated at the age of 78. A huge part, 37 years of his life gone. And he was exonerated through a DNA evidence, right? So he gets exonerated. But even after that, he says, I don't have 1 minute's regret. It was a glorious experience.
That's like the definition of just being content with your life, no matter your circumstance. To me, that's pretty hard.
It really is.
And I kind of want to. This goes back really well to the idea of framing, because I didn't want to fully flesh this out.
But go ahead, because I still have more to talk about.
Okay, because I want to talk about framing and the difference between wanting and liking as well.
We'll get to. I'll get to that point.
Yeah. So, this guy named Ethan Kross, he did a lot of work on framing, and basically, I didn't have access to the actual study of how they did this, but I can give you the results of the study because I was able to get the abstract, which is pretty easy to get. But there are 3 things. He focuses on this thing called psychological self-distancing, and which is basically what we call framing, which is like picturing future you as imagining how future you would view present you's situation, and then using that as a way to guide your present self of how to move forward. And so he found that doing that, psychologically self-distancing, which I'm sure that's how that probably helps what's his name in the example?
My man Maurice
Bickham. Yeah. So he probably psychologically self-distanced himself, and one of the huge things that they found was that psychological self-distancing was really strongly associated with lower emotional reactivity, and it was also strongly associated with problem solving. So it means that instead of just being in the moment, reactive emotionally to whatever's happening, you're thinking about how your future self would view your present self situation, and you're saying, okay, reacting to this would not be the best thing for me right now. I need to actively work on a solution to the problem at hand. And I guess in Maurice Bickham's case, there's nothing he can actually do except simply be content with where he was. And so that helped him frame his present self by looking from his future self's perspective and saying, all right, I'm here,
What's gonna help me
and
get
yeah,
out? Yeah.
I can't change like the fact that I'm here,
Yeah.
but I can change like how I feel about
Because
it.
he could have, he could have had like, there's so much, like, imagine the anger you have, like, yo, I didn't do it. Like, he could have went crazy in prison, could have extended his
That would
time.
have drove me mad.
But he
like,
probably, he probably stayed very peaceful and zenful, and it allowed him to still say, like, even though he was incarcerated 37 years without him being actually the one to do it, he still says, I didn't have a single regret. It was a glorious experience. So then, like, you ask yourself, okay, well, all of this, like, he's able to synthesize his happiness, blah, 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 blah. Well, what does synthesizing happiness have to do? Well, one, understanding that we can synthesize happiness and it seems something like common. You're like, oh, well, duh, like, obviously you're going to have to be happy. But, like, people kind of overlook this because we have a lot of choices. And one of the things about synthesizing happiness is that choices and being able to choose and having options is actually an enemy of synthesizing happiness. It's actually an enemy, right?
It's very. I don't remember where I got this from, but like, you know how when you go to a restaurant, you always get the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually proven that like if you go to ice cream shop and you've had like 10 of the flavors, what happens is because you've had all the flavors, and you can only have one when you go, you're gonna be like, wow, like this flavor's good, but I missed out on 9 others. But if you'd only tried one flavor, you wouldn't really know how the others taste, and you'd actually be completely content with that one flavor.
Exactly.
Which is like a lot of times why we stay with like very certain things, and that's a very interesting like idea.
And it
like
goes,
options are the enemy. Like it makes you less happy because like the options that you have makes you realize what you don't have instead of focusing on what you do have.
Exactly. And so you hit home on this. There's a study he did, and it was the free choice. He called it like the free choice paradigm, where so what they did was they brought 6 I think Monet.
Is that Monet?
Monet, yeah, Monet. I don't know how to pronounce things. If you guys didn't know,
that's art, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they brought out 6
artist.
Monet prints, right? 6 Monet prints, and so first it was just like a normal people, and they said, okay, rank these six prints, and so they ranked them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, right? And so they said, okay, you guys get to choose 3 and 4. You guys get to go home with 3 and 4. You just have to pick one. Obviously these people picked number 3 because they ranked it number 3, so they liked it a bit more. And so then what they did was 15 days later they said, all right, guys, come and rank them again. And the ones they had, usually the one they took, number 3, ended up actually becoming higher in their ranking. So it went from number 3 would actually go from being ranked number 3 to being ranked number 2 or being ranked number 1 for some cases. And it's because they were content with what they had. Like once they had it, they realized like, oh, the thing I have now sucks. Even though they thought they had liked number 1 better before they had it.
That's a very interesting
since
idea.
Like they had their only option was to take 3 and 4.
They became accustomed to 3 and 4,
happy.
and they just became totally content with those,
and
with that painting.
Yeah,
and
they were able to synthesize that happiness for that painting, even though like they couldn't, even though they from just their first time looking at it, they thought number 1 was better, but because they had number 3 and that's all they had, their only option, they had it. So let me finish. I know you have a lot to say. I want to make sure you get to your points. But then so they did the study again with they called integrate amnesia. Am I saying that right?
I've honestly never heard I know amnesia is how you say that. The other word I don't even know.
So integrate amnesia is the loss of ability to create new memories after the event that caused the amnesia, so leading to partial or complete inabilities to recall the recent event, while long-term memories from before the event remain intact. So just meaning like something happened that caused them amnesia, so they can remember everything before then, but everything after, like their recent recent memories,
like their ability to form new memories after a certain point is lost. So like everything that happened after the event that caused them to start having amnesia, they don't remember anything since then, but they remember everything before that.
Yeah. So the reason why it's important to know that is because they did it with these people. Same thing, went and asked them rank these, right? So they ranked them and they told them, look, you get to pick between 3 and 4, and obviously they picked 3 because they ranked it a little bit higher. And so what happened is these people have like that, they can't remember anything. Right. You walk out of a room, and they waited only 15 minutes, 30 minutes compared to 15 days with normal people, but 30 minutes came back, and those people didn't even remember what picture they had picked. Okay. Out of all 6, so like the previous study, those people knew because they had perfectly fine memory.
But they have amnesia, so like they don't remember the paintings.
They don't know anything.
So how does this like?
But
keep going.
They still ended up ranking the picture they took higher.
Really?
It's very interesting.
That's a very interesting study.
So it's just, and then so he just emphasized again, like, happiness can be synthesized, even though, like, because it said it's a subconscious thing. It's not happening consciously. So, like, even though they may not remember it, but somewhere in their brain might have connected happiness. Those neurons between it, like,
Right.
might have strengthened the happiness they felt when they saw it, even though they don't remember seeing it. Right. So they were able to, enjoy that more. And then so all of this being said is that, like, again, freedom of choice is like the worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I do want to hit up on this
Freedom
other
of choice
study.
in the sense that, like, you're less happy if you have more choices,
Yeah,
not
and
like in general.
and yeah, and just a last example. I'm
Keep going.
sorry.
Yeah, no, you're
last
good.
example here. And so another one that I thought was really cool. He called this like the unanticipated joy of being totally stuck. Right. So, like, like we said. So again, whenever and if you think about it, synthesizing your happiness, or accepting something for accepting a situation that you're in, even though it didn't go your way, and being happy about it would be much harder if you had options, right?
Right.
Like, you're like, oh, this didn't really go well, but, like, if someone's like, hey, look, you still have this chance to do something else, like, it kind of give you this conflicting feeling.
Right.
And a good case, a good study they did about this was, so it was another Harvard study, and so they created a photography class, and so they allowed students to come into the photography class, and they made these students take 12 pictures of, like, anything around Harvard. They're like, take 12 pictures of anywhere where you would want to, like, memory, like, for Harvard memories or whatever,
Okay. Yeah.
And then they told them, all right, choose 2 pictures. Okay, cool. All right, so they chose 2 pictures. But then they made those students, they give them another choice. Now you need to keep 1. And so they had 2 groups. They did this with.
Okay.
One of the groups, they got the option that, look, we'll let you trade it in at any time, like, for 4 days. You have 4 days to, like, you can either keep the one you want, or you can, come back and trade, and you have 4 days to do it. I'll even
Okay.
check in with you in those 4 days, right? And then another group was like, you can't, like, you make a decision now,
Right,
it's gone.
it's
Like,
done.
you're not
Yeah,
able to, right? You're not able to. And so what they did was they had some group of students predict how happy they would be, and then they had another group of students that would go away, and then they would ask them after, like, a day before their choice ended, and a day after, right? And so what happened was, and what you saw was, so when students predicted how happy they thought they were going to be in 3 days,
Mm-hmm.
it was relatively the same. The people that had the choice of swapping their pictures, they're like, oh, okay, I'll be as happy, but their happiness was a bit lower, but the difference in the happiness was not significant. But then what you see here is, and we can put this up if you want, and you see this graph I'm showing you.
Yeah, we'll put it up.
And so what you see is the people that actually had the ability to reverse it, they were much less happy because they kept thinking about the other picture. They're
Right.
like, because think about it, it's the picture of memories. It's something significant too. So being like, oh, would I want the memory
You
of,
would
like,
want that,
me and
yeah.
that professor, or me and my friends at this
True.
cool place? So they were conflicted because they had options. So they had to be like, I don't know if I'm fully happy with this. Like, yes, I like it, but, like, oh, what about the other one?
Yeah.
So it gave them this back and forth thing of being like, right? And so, but then what they saw was, obviously, and that's the day before the end of the swap, before they could swap it.
Right.
And then the following day, 5 days after the swap,
Uh-huh.
same result. The people that didn't have the choice of swapping, they were much happier and content because that's all they had. They couldn't go back. They
Right.
had no other option. They just had to adapt, and and they just became
There's
content.
a
with it.
very interesting application to this, and so
I was gonna say something about relationships. I was gonna say relationships.
I was gonna so I have 2, like, I was gonna go into relationships actually.
Yeah.
The most interesting thing is really, like, when you hear people say, like, looking back on my life, like, I've made a lot of mistakes, but I wouldn't do it any other way. They say that because you can't, right?
Yeah.
And because you can't, you're content with whatever's happened because
Mhm.
you hedonically adapted to being content with
Yeah.
what you just had because you have no other options,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
all those ideas of, like, options make you less happy, framing, looking back on something, and hedonically adapting to something, they all work in tandem very
Mhm.
closely. We won't have time to get to wanting and liking, so we'll move
Yeah.
that to a different
But
episode.
I do want to make.
Yeah, keep going.
I do want to make a quick. I guess so. We're kind of ending. We're coming to an end.
No,
at this
yeah,
point.
this is
Okay,
all we
cool.
have time for.
So since we did finish with me talking about synthesizing, and I think a really application of this when it comes to, like, relationships and cheating. So if
Okay.
you think about it, right, when you mentally tell yourself, and this has to do with people, this has to do with relationships and happiness, how happy your relationship is, and just, like, kind of like longevity, your
Mhm.
relationship is gonna last. So if you go as for like this, I can say this from a guy's perspective. I'm pretty sure this applies to women as well. But if a guy goes in with the perspective being like they're thinking, I want one person like this. I want this one, good partner, and that's it. That's what I want to focus my attention.
Right.
You're limiting your choices, right? So regardless of like, even if you go through something bad with that person, you're still like
you've mentally locked in your choice. So like, you're not focused on anyone else, and because of that, you're content with that partner first, and then because you're content with them, you won't cheat with others.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's a really good way to frame it. I like how you.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was a great connection.
You won't cheat with them, and it's like you're gonna be willing to put through the work
Right.
of being with them, compared to if you go in with the mindset being like, I'm gonna date this person, but just see, I still got options. Like
right.
if your mindset is like, oh, I still got options coming into this. You're giving yourself choices. Like you're not gonna like as soon as something doesn't go your way, the natural happiness fades. You're not able, and remember guys, synthetic happiness works best when you're stuck, when there's no options. It works best when the little options or none. Like absolutely.
And the reason it works best, at least from my perspective, is because like if you have options, it's very difficult to tell yourself you don't have options. So basically what you would have to do to simulate like less options or essentially force that is literally lock in and not let yourself, like once you make a decision, you're done, right? And it's very difficult to do because if you have no one else enforcing that decision, like telling you that's the only option, like there's like you can easily change it unless you decide like not to, then it's very hard not to think like, oh, I still have this option.
Yeah.
So like that's that comes in.
So that comes in. And
so
is there any finishing points?
No,
I have just one more. I have one quote.
Okay, yeah.
One quote to end
I have one
off.
quote as well, actually.
Please, I love quotes.
I'm gonna say this quote every episode because I think that
every happiness episode. Okay, I was like,
no, not every episode. We're gonna end with my quote and Marmel's quote. This is so profound to me. You cannot become happy. You can only be happy. You cannot become happy. There's nothing in this world that will make you happy. You can only just live happy. So we're going to talk more about what makes you happy, personality-wise, like relationships, how it relates to wealth, wanting and liking things. We have so many things coming.
This might end up being like 5 episodes.
We might have to do.
We cut out 2 topics we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So go finish off with what you had to say.
But the last quote, and this again goes with synthesizing happiness, and it's from William Shakespeare. I know some people like Shakespeare and some people don't. Majority don't because your teachers ruined it in English for you. But so, 'tis nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. 'Tis nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. As in just saying, like, again, and this is something I always stress on. Reality is subjective.
Everything is relative.
Everything is relative. Everything is subjective. So yes, of course, there's like we have standards for what is good and bad, but in reality, and like we said, like in the long term and in your long term happiness, something that occurs is not going to fully determine your happiness. So in a bad event that occurs once in your life, 3 months later, it's more likely you're gonna have moved on. The hedonic effect, you're just gonna have to force to. Life continues to goes on.
Yep.
But on Shakespeare's quote, again, just nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So when a bad event occurs, if you can think the positives and and understand the time frame at which it'll take you to recover, then your happiness is still has a good chance.
True. Yeah. Great way to close this. So guys, just remember expectations, framing, synthetic happiness. And the last thing is hedonic adaptation. Those are all very general ideas on happiness. We have more very specific things coming in the next episodes, so look for those. Thank you so much for watching.
This was a great way to start that happiness series. Like Ben said, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch y'all, I think either Thursday or next week. Just stay tuned. Peace, love, and positivity. We're out.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Adapt or Die podcast.
For more information about us, follow us on Instagram at AdaptOrDie or find us on TikTok at AOD Podcast. You can also watch the podcast on our YouTube channel at AOD Co, spelled AODCO.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, continue to explore and adapt.